Have you ever felt like your own mind is kind of working against you? You make these choices that when you look back seem totally illogical. Well, it turns out that's not a bug, it's a feature. It's a fundamental part of how your brain is designed. And today we're going to pull back the curtain on the surprising dual nature of your mind.
All right, let's just jump right in with a question. Think about it for a second. Finding 20 bucks on the street? That feels pretty good. But losing a $20 bill? That feels awful. For most of us, it hurts about twice as much as the win feels good. It's the same amount of money, so what's going on? Why the huge emotional gap? This little puzzle is our way into one of the biggest ideas in psychology. And the answer is you're not actually thinking with one single unified mind. Nope. Inside your head, you've got two different systems running at the same time, and a lot of the time, they're pulling in completely opposite directions. Understanding this is the key to unlocking why we all act in these, well, predictably irrational ways. Now, this idea was made famous by the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman. He gave these two ways of thinking really simple names, System 1 and System 2. One is fast, the other is slow. And together, they pretty much govern every single decision you make, every day. So what's the difference? Well, System 1 is your gut. It's your autopilot. It's the part of your brain that lets you instantly recognize your friend in a crowd or drive down an empty road without even thinking about it. It's always on, working behind the scenes. System 2, on the other hand, is the conscious thinker. It's the one you have to wake up to solve a math problem or figure out how to parallel park. It's super powerful, but here's the catch. It's also slow, it takes a ton of effort, and frankly, it's pretty lazy. And that last part from Kahneman, no sense of voluntary control, that's everything. Just think about it for a second. The vast majority of your thoughts and actions every single day are run by this automatic system. It's your brain's default setting, all for the sake of efficiency. But that efficiency comes at a price. And that price is a whole series of predictable mental glitches. See, because System 1 is built for speed, not necessarily for 100% accuracy, it relies on shortcuts. And these shortcuts create these systematic patterns of error in our judgment, what we now call cognitive biases. The engine driving all these biases are things called heuristics. The best way to think of them is as your brain's rules of thumb. Instead of painstakingly analyzing every single piece of information, System 1 just uses a heuristic to make a good enough guess, really, really fast. And most of the time, they work great, but sometimes they lead us way off track. Let's look at a few big ones. Loss aversion. That's why losing 20 bucks hurts so much. The availability heuristic. That's why people are more afraid of shark attacks than falling coconuts, even though coconuts kill way more people. Shark attacks are just more dramatic and easier to remember. Anchoring is why the first price you see for a car totally frames the rest of the negotiation. And status quo bias, that's why we just stick with the default options on everything, from our phone's ringtone to our company's retirement plan. Kahneman and his research partner Amos Tversky wrapped all these ideas into something they called prospect theory. It's basically a map of how we actually make decisions when there's risk involved, not how some perfectly logical robot would, but how real messy humans do. It accounts for all these weird glitches in our thinking. Okay, this table looks a little intense, but it's absolutely brilliant. Let's walk through it. Look at the top row. When there's a high probability of a gain, we get cautious. We play it safe. We'd rather take a sure thing. But with a high probability of a loss, suddenly we become gamblers. We'll take a huge risk to try and avoid that loss. Now look at the bottom row for low probabilities. For a small chance at a huge gain, we're total risk seekers. That's why we buy lottery tickets. But for a small chance of a huge loss, we become super cautious and risk-averse. That's why we buy insurance. Our logic completely flips depending on the situation. So if our decision-making is this predictable, you gotta wonder, right? Can this be used to influence us? Oh yeah, for sure. This knowledge has gone way beyond the psychology lab and into the real world, shaping the choices you make every single day. The fancy term for this is choice architecture. It's just the idea that the way a choice is presented to you has a massive impact on what you decide. And by understanding how our lazy System 1 works, you can design choices that gently nudge people toward a better outcome, all without forcing them to do anything. And once you see it everywhere. Making organ donation the default you have to opt out of, donation rates skyrocket. Automatically enrolling people in retirement plans, it uses our own inertia for our own good. Putting a little smiley face on your energy bill when you use less power than your neighbors, that's a nudge. It's all aimed squarely at your automatic, fast-thinking System 1. Okay, so up to this point, this all sounds a little depressing, right? Like our brains are just these buggy, glitch-filled machines that are easily manipulated. But hold on, because now we get to the big twist in the story.
We have to ask the most important question of all. What if these so-called errors aren't actually errors? What if these glitches are actually a sign of a much deeper, more useful form of intelligence? This is the argument from another brilliant psychologist, Gerd Gigerenzer. He basically looks at this whole biases and errors idea and says, hang on a second. In the messy, complex, uncertain world that we actually live in, he argues these shortcuts aren't flaws. They're incredibly effective, adaptive tools. It comes down to his idea of ecological rationality. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the concept is simple. A mental shortcut is smart, not because it follows the perfect rules of logic, but because it works incredibly well in its natural environment. It's about being street smart, not just book smart. And this leads to a conclusion that might just blow your mind. The less is more effect. It's this wild, counterintuitive idea that in many real-world situations, you can make better, more accurate decisions by intentionally ignoring information and just using a simple rule of thumb. Take this real-world example. Researchers studied how managers at a company predicted which of their customers would buy from them again. Now, they could have used some super complex statistical model, but instead, experienced managers often just used a simple rule. If a customer hasn't bought anything in 9 months, they're gone. That's it. They ignored almost all the other data. So what happened? Well, look at this. That dead simple hiatus heuristic was right 83% of the time. The complex statistical model, with all its data and computing power, was only right 75% of the time. This is wild. By ignoring information, the managers actually made a better call. Less was literally more. So, all of this leaves us with two very different ways to think about our own minds. On one hand, you have a flawed machine full of biases. On the other hand, you have this adaptive toolbox full of smart shortcuts. So you have Kahneman's view, which says these heuristics create biases, and we should use our slow, logical system to catch them and fix them. Then you have Gigerenzer's view, which says these heuristics are awesome, fast and frugal tools. The trick isn't to get rid of them, but to know which tool is right for which job. And really, that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? Maybe the point isn't to try and suppress our gut feelings to be more rational. Maybe the real skill, the real intelligence, is developing the wisdom to know when to trust your fast, intuitive System 1 and when it's time to slow down and fire up that deliberate, analytical System 2. The key isn't choosing one mind over the other. It's learning how to master both.